Hi, welcome to another student success workshop. This one is called Studying Well Equals Test Success by me, Raquel Lato. So who am I? Well, here's a picture of me and my son who hates having his picture taken. Anyway, I am a learning strategist at Algoma U, and I work in our learning center and accessibility services. I provide academic support to students, so that might be learning strategy support, whether one-on-one or through presentations like this. I also coordinate our peer tutoring program. So if you're struggling with the content of a class, a peer tutor might be very helpful for you. A peer tutor is somebody who's already taken the class and done well, and the Learning Center will cover 6 hours of free tutoring per course per semester. You can contact me two ways. You can email learning@algomau.ca, or you can email me directly at raquel.lato@algomau.ca. The next slide contains a very short little video of me talking about studying, and I'm going to see you after that. Hi, it's Raquel from the Learning Center again. This is my last student success video in this series, and the topic is studying. But before I get into studying, I want to say, if you haven't watched my other videos, I really recommend that you do. Because in those videos, I spend a lot of time talking about how to be an effective and efficient student all semester long. And I mention a lot of things that you can do throughout the semester that will reduce the amount of time you need studying. So they're really valuable to watch, and I encourage you to do so. But today we're talking specifically about studying. And I have to say this. There's no fast, easy way to do it. I'm sorry, everybody wants a quick fix, but there isn't one. To learn half a semester's worth of material, a whole semester's worth of material, takes a lot of time. You have to start studying early. You cannot cram in a whole semester's worth in just a few hours before the exam. It isn't going to work, and you're setting yourself up to fail. Studying does take time, but there are things that you can do to make it more efficient and effective, and that's what I'm going to talk about in this video today. So let's get started. So active versus passive learners. So one of the biggest things that I stress about being a good student is being a good active student all semester. This is really going to help you do well overall, and it's going to help you do much better on your final exams. So being an active student all semester means doing your reading every week, being engaged in class, taking notes, participating in discussions, paying attention, reviewing your notes periodically. This goes a really long way. If you don't do these things throughout the semester, and you kind of go to class sometimes, you don't always pay attention in class, you don't do your reading, what you're doing is you're setting yourself up to not be successful, because you're now going to have to teach yourself an entire semester's worth of material for the exam. So if you've seen my videos before, you've seen this. I pull it out in every single one of them. We're talking today about studying, but I want to spend a few minutes again on this idea of being an active student all semester. So as a student, you've got things you need to do on your own time that you do not get a grade for. Then you have the things that you do that you get a grade for, such as assignments, which could be research essays, case studies, group presentations. In computer science, they're very hands-on. Maybe you've actually built an app, for example. So assignments really take different forms depending on your class. And then you have tests and exams. So that's how you get a grade. But that grade that you get on those is really based on what you did on your own time. So that goes back to the pink circles. The first thing you should be doing is your reading. The idea is to do that prior to the scheduled class. When you're in class, you're note-taking, which means taking down the extra information that isn't on the slide. You're participating in discussions. You're asking questions, and you're just really being engaged with the class. And then you study. If you've done your reading all semester, if you've been engaged in class all semester, then your studying is going to go a lot better. If you didn't do any of the reading, you did not take extra notes in class, you just sat there and sort of listened, then I can tell you studying is going to be quite an ordeal for you because you've got nothing prior to build on. You are starting from scratch. And that's putting yourself in a position where you're probably not going to succeed. And that's what we don't want. So I did do this chart in my note-taking workshop, I believe, but it just shows you the benefits of reviewing your notes periodically. So if you think of studying as an ongoing process, every week I spend some time reviewing the previous notes. As you can see from the chart with regular review, it really makes a very big difference in how much you're able to remember. Without review, which is the red line, you can see that by one day after a class, you're barely going to remember 25% of the material. That's not very much, and that's only one day later. So 1 month later, when you maybe have your first test, if you did no regular review, you pretty much don't remember anything, which means you're starting from scratch. So weekly regular review is something that doesn't have to take up a huge amount of time, but the impact it has is huge on reducing how much you have to spend studying later. So it's a simple thing to do, but it really makes a big difference. Okay, so let's actually talk now about scheduling studying, not sort of this studying all semester process. So you do have an exam or a midterm coming up, and you want to think about, what do I need to do to study? So research shows that smaller blocks of time spread out over a longer period works better than long sections of time over a short period. So I'm going to use the number 12. 12 hours of studying. I am not saying 12 is the right number, and in many cases that's nowhere near enough time. I'm using 12 just because the math is easy. So you need to study about 12 hours for a midterm. You could, in theory, study for 12 hours the day before. Neglect every other class, neglect everything else, and sit and cram for 12 hours. The truth is, you're not going to remember very much. Our brains cannot handle that. You could do 2 days before, 6 hours and 6 hours. Well, that's better than one 12-hour day, but it's still overwhelming and not enough. But what if you started 4 days before and did 3 hours every day? That is going to be much more helpful. But the best would be to actually start 6 days before and just study 2 hours a day for 6 days. They all equal 12, but the difference is how effective are those hours. So start studying early so that you can spread it out in shorter chunks of time each day. Don't set yourself up to fail by expecting to learn a massive amount of information in a short time. Our brains can't handle it, and it won't work. So the studying environment, when you're studying, find your optimal amount of study time. So what I say to students is, how long can you maintain really good focus? 45 minutes? An hour? There's no right or wrong. It just means, what should I be thinking about when I plan out my day in terms of time? If I can focus and study really, really well for an hour, then I'm going to work in hour increments, and then I'll take a little break. So using that time frame, create a schedule and stick to it. This is really important if you are studying for more than one midterm or exam at the same time. And that is going to happen. Sit at a desk or a table, no beds. There's something about getting ourselves physically ready that makes a big difference. So actually, get up, have a shower, get dressed, sit at a desk. Little things go a long way into making you more effective and efficient. And eliminate the distractions. When you're studying, you're studying. You're not doing anything else, because university work is hard and it takes as much focus as we can give it. It takes all our focus, really. We're not good at multitasking. We just want to be good at multitasking. So that's a pretty big difference there. Okay, so I like the idea of making study notes. And the reason is because you can't study everything. So study notes are a way to focus and condense the information you need to study. So going through your class notes, you identify the things you feel you must know. So obviously your key definitions, your concepts, your important people, your dates, etc. It depends on the class. But also, you may have been given a review that gives you the areas you need to focus on. So if you've got that, that's amazing. If you don't, well, you do your best and you make what you hope will be the right decisions about where you need to focus. See if there's anything in your textbook that the prof maybe alluded to that you think is important, and pay attention and put that into your study notes as well. If you have been working with a prof that uses a lot of articles instead of a textbook, assigned articles, then you need to know those articles, the author, the title, what it's about, because there's a good chance you're going to have to relate to those in your exam or midterm. When you make your study notes, they do need to have some sort of heading and subheading. So the format doesn't really matter as long as you're defining things. So it could be like a linear progression, like an outline. You might like a concept map style where you have a big circle in the middle that says something and then like all your little bubbles that come off it. Charts or graphs might be the best way to study the information, or it's a combination of different things. But you need to have your headings and your subheadings because you need to see relationships. University is not about regurgitation of independent facts. So don't study independent facts without looking at how everything works together. Because a larger essay question, for example, is going to pull in a couple different ideas under one big umbrella topic, for example. Now, word about flashcards. Flashcards encourage learning independent facts, and most classes don't work that way. But there are some classes, especially first year, that do. So first year biology, for example, very heavy on your terms and definitions. First year psychology as well. So it just depends. But something like first year social work, flashcards are probably not going to work well. First year sociology, history, they deal with bigger concepts. So you can certainly use flashcards, but just think, is this the right choice for the type of material for this class? If it's a class with a lot of definitions, then yes, it may be helpful. So when you're making study notes, be active. Don't just copy the words. Think about the concept. Try and rewrite it in your own words. Look for the relationships between ideas. Again, don't focus on those independent pieces of information. And the formula. So I've talked about this in most of my workshops. Generally, a 5-mark short answer question might follow this formula, which is, what is something? Why is it important? How does it work? How does it relate to this? And then an example. It's never usually just about what is it? And then you regurgitate a memorized definition. No, that's just not really going to happen in a university setting with a test or midterm exam. So you always need to think a little farther than the what. You need some supporting details. And the best place to start all the time is, why is this important? And that alone can give you some good information to work with. And then an example that you can explain. So knowing this might be the format of a question, put this as the format of your study notes. So typing versus longhand. So this is an interesting question I get a lot. Should I write my study notes by hand? Should I type them? So there is a ton of research on this, but these two guys here, I think they're both male, Mueller and Oppenheimer, they did a lot of work on this, comparing longhand or handwritten notes versus typing. And no matter how they replicated it over and over again, even when they gave the students that were typing, even when they gave them note-taking strategies, over and over again, the results were always the same. The students that wrote things by hand remembered more than students who typed. So their conclusion, which is very wordy, and I'm going to simplify this, was basically because writing by hand is slower and it takes us a bit longer, we tend to naturally summarize. Because I don't want to write all that by hand. So because we want to shorten it up, we summarize it. And they called that heavier mental lifting. And that summarizing turns into an increased conceptual understanding, application, and retention. So knowing this, it's probably valuable to be writing some of your study notes and things out by hand, because the research shows over and over and over again that you are more likely to remember it. Okay, so you've got study notes. Now, here's what's kind of cool. Creating study notes is studying. So just the act of going through your notes, what do I need to know? What do I know about this? Can I summarize this? Can I put this in my own words? That is studying. So it's not ever a waste of time to make study notes. And you may find that after you've made them, there are things that was enough. You remember it. I always use the analogy when I go to the grocery store. I sit down. What do we have in the cupboard? What do we have in the fridge? What do I want to cook? So what do I need to buy? I think it through. I write it on a list. I go to the grocery store and I don't look at my list. Because the act of creating the list was enough to help me remember. Now, once you've got your study notes though, what are you going to do with them? Well, of course you read it. But don't stop there. That's passive. Think about it. Reword it. Relate it to your life. And I know this sounds weird, but recite it out loud a few times. When we say something out loud, it helps us remember it. So actually say it out loud, even though you feel kind of silly doing it. You have to really process the information to move it into your long-term memory. Just rereading it isn't enough to do that. Ask yourself, can I teach this to someone else? And then pretend to do it. So I use this example all the time. A student was studying for first year sociology and he told me he was ready to go. His midterm was that day. He's in my office. So I took his notes. I said, okay, well, let's see where you're at. So the very first thing I asked him was culture. I said, so define the concept of culture to me. And I know that that's probably going to be on his test. So he went like this. Culture. We all have it. Well, buddy, no, that's not going to help. So can I teach this to somebody else? He couldn't. He couldn't recall it. He couldn't verbalize it, which means on the test, he's probably not going to recall it there either. So you need to actually do this. You need to pretend to teach it to somebody else. Now, understanding versus memorizing. A lot of first-year students direct from high school come and see me after their first round of midterms. And they come to see me because they really didn't do very well on their midterms, but they studied. And so they're feeling a little deflated and not really understanding why they didn't do well. And I have found that in conversation with many of them, it comes down to this. They've memorized independent pieces of information. But if you've only memorized it and not fully understood it, you cannot recognize it in different situations. So a simple way to explain this is you've memorized some definitions, you get to the test is presented to you as a scenario. And you need to analyze that scenario. But because you only memorized definitions and didn't actually understand or attempt to apply them, you cannot analyze the scenario because you don't actually have the right information to do it. So when you understand the information and how it applies, the goal is then to handle any situation on the test. If it's a scenario, if it's providing you the example first, possibly. But most of the time, you don't have test questions that just say, what is culture? And you write down your memorized description. So what do you do if you don't understand? You have to tackle it. You need to put in the work to understand it. And this should actually be the first part of your studying, is tackle the things you don't understand. So review the textbook, review the class notes, look for examples, ask somebody, and find more information from different sources. This is where you go to Google, and I hate this expression, but you try to find the dumbed down version. Can you find it explained in a different, easier way that allows you to understand it? Can you find a YouTube video of a completely different person explaining it, and maybe they just explain it in a different way? You need to tackle it if you don't understand it. So thinking like the prof, as you're studying, ask yourself, what would be a good test question here? What is the most important piece of information that I need to know? And think about the type of test. It should not be a surprise. Is it going to be 100 multiple choice? Is it going to be a collection of short answer questions? Is it going to be just a few long essay questions? How you study for those different types of tests does really matter and makes a difference. So think about all of these things in your studying. Now, studying versus test taking. So studying is really putting information into your long-term memory. So we do that by repetition. We do it by making it relevant. We do it by summarizing. We do it by saying it out loud. All those things that I've been talking about, that's the process to study. But taking a test is exactly the opposite. Test taking is pulling information out of your brain, or we call that retrieval. So I do all this work to study, but then I go to the test and I'm asked to do the exact opposite thing. So you need to practice your retrieval as part of study. So it can be as easy as a simple quiz and recall, which simply means cover up the paper and recite from memory a few times. Just put your hand over it. Or if you are working on a laptop, just fold the screen down so you can't see it. Can I pull out that definition of culture? Can I pull out what a crown corporation is? Whatever it is, can I actually do it? And recite it from memory a few times. And if you can't, you go back to it again. Okay, what is it? Read it over, say it out loud. Okay, let me retrieve it again. Teach it to someone else, even if it's just pretend. And you can also write out the information, since test taking is a writing activity. Test taking involves reading, of course, but your answers are all writing. So put yourself in that state where you're practicing the retrieval through writing, because that is what you're going to do on the test. Now, an actual practice test is something you can do. And you can do this in your study process sort of at any point. And what you do is you just go through your study notes and turn the chapter headings into questions. So again, I'm just going to stick with the culture example. So my practice test question might be, define the concept of culture and provide an example for 5 marks. So now without my notes, I'm going to attempt to answer that. So culture is a shared set of values and beliefs and mores and blah, blah, blah. Culture is important to our daily lives because, an example, so on. What you do when you're finished is you basically go through and mark your test. You're going to know already what you got right and what you didn't. But the point is not that you fail a practice test. The point is it's to help you identify where you need to focus now. If I nailed the culture question, it's in my long-term memory. I can read it over once or twice. That's all I need to do. It's there. But this other question, I couldn't really remember any of it. So now I know I need to focus on that. So the practice test really just helps you identify where you need to keep focusing and what's in your long-term memory and what isn't. So this concludes my studying workshop. As I said in my video before, I really suggest watching all of the workshops because it really encourages you being an active student all semester. But just a reminder that I am here to help you. My job is to help students, so you are never bothering me. I can help with one-on-one individualized help. Just a reminder that we have our peer tutoring program, so that's where you can get help with the class content. We also have a writing lab and math lab, so you can get help with those. And you can email me at learning.algomau.ca or raquel.lado@algomau.ca. Now, even if you're not sure what area you need help in, I suggest that you meet with me and we'll have a conversation and we'll get you set up with the help that you need. Maybe it is learning strategy help. Maybe it's just content help, which is our peer tutoring program, but we'll figure it out together and we'll get you the help you need. But one really strong piece of advice, seek help early. I can't help you the day before the exam. And I've had students show up in my office literally the day before. You need to get help early. So best of luck with your midterms and your exams. And just remember that I'm always here to help you. So thanks for tuning in today. Bye.